Let me ask you a question. What do you see when I hold this up? I mean, you might say a water bottle, obviously, but what do you read? You'd read Aquafina. I read a barcode. It's the same bottle of water. We just see it from two different perspectives. It's kind of the way religion can be at times. Depending on your perspective, you see it different ways. And certainly that's the way it is with Christianity. I mean, maybe for you, your perspective of Christianity is a little bit like my surroundings right now. You see stained glass windows and pews and kind of a cathedral or a chapel or a church that maybe you felt welcomed in at one point, or maybe not so much. Maybe a place you've never been, but maybe a place you never really want to go. Maybe a place you used to go, but now you don't want to ever return. And I think that's why for a lot of us, we say things like, I like Jesus, just not Christianity. Or I'm just not into organized religion. Or I'm just spiritual. I'm not into any kind of religion per se. But what if Christianity wasn't what you thought? I mean, I've seen people that are interested in Jesus, but they just don't like his friends all that much. And this is probably the number one thing that turns people away from the Christian faith. It's people who claim to follow Jesus and are outspoken about their faith, but they come across as judgmental, hypocritical, and intolerant. And maybe that's the only angle of the water bottle you've ever seen. And so when we talk about in this series, Christianity for people who aren't Christians, you think, well, why would I want anything to do with Christianity? Because all it is are people that are judgmental, hypocritical, and intolerant. And I don't want to be that. So no thanks. Well, what I want to do is I just want to spend some time talking about those three things: judgmental, hypocritical, and intolerant. Because for a lot of us, that is the roadblock that keeps us from absolutely coming to Jesus, because we think that's not who I want to be. So let's talk about those three words. Let's talk about the first one, which is judgmental. Now, we all know the judgmental type, right? People who think they're better than everyone else, or they act morally superior and find fault in everyone. They also lack compassion and grace towards other people. If you've ever had a run-in with someone like this and they call themselves a follower of Jesus, it's a terrible and confusing experience, because Christians are supposed to be grace people. And grace is what separates Christianity from every other belief system. Grace is this incredible commodity that sees us for who we really are, not just for our mistakes and failures and flaws. And it's really this dispenser of forgiveness, the spirit that restores those who have fallen. And it's so amazing that we sing songs with titles like Amazing Grace. So it can really be confusing to discover that sometimes the last place it's found is with people who follow Jesus. Now, why is this? Why are Christians sometimes the most judgmental people you've ever met? Why are some Jesus people not being very Jesus-y? Well, that's a great question. Jesus actually went out of his way to warn his followers not to judge. In fact, here are some words from the most famous message he ever gave, the Sermon on the Mount. In Matthew chapter 7, verses 1 and 2, it says, "Do not judge, or you too will be judged. For in the same way you will judge others, you will be judged. And with the measure you use, it will be measured to you." Now let's look at that word judge for just a second. He says, don't do it. Don't judge, period. In other words, judging is God's job, not ours. So when you and I judge others, we are putting ourselves in position of God. Now, to be fair, sometimes when people say, don't judge me, it's code for, don't you dare say that anything I do is wrong or bad. That's not what being judgmental is about. The judgmental person Jesus is talking about is someone who is a fault finder, somebody who's negative and destructive towards other people, not a critical eye, but a critical spirit. And this is not reflective of the life Jesus has called us to live. Maybe you've never thought about this before, but do you know who every local church is made up of? A community of moral mess-ups who are collectively struggling in this together. In every local church, and that includes RLCM, we have sins of pride and greed and pornography and lying and stealing, adultery and lack of love toward others, and that includes the most vulnerable. And I'm probably just scratching the surface and I'm at the top of the list. But together, we are learning to walk with Jesus. And in His power, we overcome these sins in our lives because it's not God's best for us. Now, we don't want to judge people for these areas in their life, nor do we want to deny or rationalize them away. We want to help each other by exposing them and then helping them walk out of them, and to do it in a way that doesn't condemn people. But, like I hopefully have done with other people in my life, is just to talk about an issue that maybe both of us are dealing with, and we begin to walk out of it together. To do it in a way that transforms us to be more like Jesus. It's really how God designed it to work in our lives. It's messy, but it's beautiful. Now, that's the first big word, judgmentalism. Okay, and maybe if you're staying away from Christianity because you don't want to be judgmental, well, good, I don't want you to be judgmental either, but it's not a reason to keep you away from following Jesus. Here's a second big one, hypocrisy. I think about one of my heroes in the line of work that I'm in was a pastor who was leading the largest church in the country for a period of time. He created a new approach to helping people find and follow Jesus, and it really inspired thousands of church leaders, including me, to rethink how they approach church. Every message he gave, I listened to. Every book he wrote, I probably read it twice. Every conference he spoke at, I was there. I looked up to him more than any other pastor. And a few years ago, it came out that he was abusive in his power, which included sexual misconduct towards female staff. When I found out, I just felt betrayed and disillusioned. I started to question a bunch of things, but I didn't abandon my faith. And here's why I didn't. Because just like judgmentalism, hypocrisy doesn't have anything to do with Jesus. Jesus wasn't the one being a hypocrite. It was this individual. So why would I reject Jesus because of what others have done? In fact, Jesus went on the warpath against hypocrisy. Here's something you've probably seen before, but you might not know the story behind it. Have you ever seen masks like this one? These were known as comedy and tragedy masks in ancient Greece, and they were actually all kinds of masks used back then because in Greek theater, actors wore masks that represented their character. And they would either put on the mask or hold the mask on a pole, and they would speak from behind the mask to say their lines. Did you know that the Greek word for one of those actors literally meant behind the mask? And the Greek word was hypocrites, which is where we get our word, hypocrite. Jesus took hold of this word and He used it in a way no one had ever used it before. He borrowed it from the theater, kind of like our way of teaching through at the movies. He was using theater long before we ever got a hold of it, and He applied it to people who were spiritual actors. Here are some of His words from Matthew chapter 23. Everything they do is for show. In other words, when He says they, He's talking about the religious leaders, and show is this theater idea again. He continues on. Hypocrites, for you are so careful to clean the outside of the cup and the dish, but inside you are filthy, full of greed and self-indulgence. In other words, hypocrites, you're spiritual actors. On the outside, you act in such a way that you look like you have it all together, but on the inside, you're a mess. And what's real about you? What's really going on? It's the opposite of what's on the outside. You're acting and it's not real. In fact, if you read the rest of this chapter, Jesus gives example after example of how they were being hypocrites. So if you don't like hypocrisy, you'd really like Jesus, because He didn't either. I can't tell you how many times I've heard someone say, I don't want to say I'm a Christian, or I don't want to become a Christian, or I don't want to be baptized and go public with my faith because I don't want to be a hypocrite. In other words, I don't have it all together yet. I'm not perfect yet. I'm not worthy. Here's the thing behind those statements. Being a Christ follower, in their minds, means they have to be perfect. And being a hypocrite means saying you're a Christ follower and not being perfect. Since I don't want to be a hypocrite, I'm not going to associate with Christians or Christianity. And the truth is the opposite of hypocrisy is not perfection. The opposite of hypocrisy is spiritual authenticity. The Christian faith is unique in holding to the idea that the first step towards authentic spirituality is not about having your act together, but knowing that you don't. Because it's when you know you don't that you recognize your need. Your need for God's grace and your power to transform your life does not come from you, but from Him. The Christian life isn't about perfection. It's about transformation. Now, let's talk about this last word. Judgmentalism, hypocrisy, and now tolerance. It's a big one for many of us. I mean, you might think that Christians are so intolerant and they lack acceptance for people from different religious backgrounds or heritage or lifestyle choices. And I understand that there are Christians who, both in the past and in the present, haven't been very tolerant. But God cares deeply about every single person on this planet. And He loves them and wants to be in a relationship with them, which means every single person is welcome at an authentic Christian church. They'll be accepted and loved and cared for. But here's where it gets tricky, and it's the way for any number of lifestyles or choices that we make. If you want to make acceptance also mean affirmation, then that's a separate conversation, because they are two different things. But you need to know we will always accept and love and care for everybody. But the invitation for all of us is to figure out where we stand with Jesus and how He applies to our lives. Do you believe He was who He said He was or not? And after you figure that out, you'll have two choices. You can reject Him, which makes all the other conversations irrelevant, or you can choose to follow Him and then begin exploring what He has said about all kinds of things in your life. That's part of the great adventure of following Jesus. But don't get this out of order, because there's no point in the conversation until you settle where you stand with Jesus. Think of it this way. Let's say you want to lose weight, and you hear about a fitness program that involves high-protein, low-carb diet combined with cardio and weightlifting. You hear this, but you don't like the idea of low carbs. You love bread. I get it. And because it seems intolerant, you reject the entire plan. Wouldn't it be wiser to assess whether the plan itself works? Whether it's been medically demonstrated to be accurate? If it passes that test, perhaps you can reassess what it says about carbs. The same is true when it comes to Jesus. Now, today, being tolerant is a cardinal virtue, but it's defined in such a narrow way. Someone will say, I'm tolerant. What that means is they are accepting of others, to which the Christian faith would agree. But if you push them even further, you find what they really mean is they're affirming of all ideas, choices, and lifestyles as equally true and right, to which the Christian faith can't agree. And you know what? You don't either. In fact, there are three kinds of tolerance. Follow me here on this. There's legal tolerance. If you're an American, this has to do with your basic First Amendment right to believe what you want to believe. There's nothing in what Jesus says or what the Bible says that disagrees with that right. Here's a second tolerance, social tolerance. This is accepting someone else as a human being regardless of what they believe, interacting with them with love and exhibiting a relational openness to them as a fellow human being. Once again, there's nothing in the Christian faith that would disagree with this. If Jesus stood for anything, it was open, loving acceptance of others as people who mattered to God, and He would eventually give His life for this. But here's the third tolerance, and that's intellectual tolerance. This is accepting of any and every idea or choice or lifestyle as being equally good, right, and true. And that's where Christianity draws the line. And truthfully, I think we all do. I mean, I have a friend of mine who decided a few years ago that even though he's a follower of Jesus, he's okay with cheating on his wife. And while I support his legal right not to believe in God if that's what he's going to do, and you know what? There's nothing about tolerance when it comes to that. And I'm accepting in my relationship with him. I completely disagree with his lifestyle choice of cheating on his wife. Is that being intolerant? Sure it is. Not legally or socially, but intellectually. The point is that I don't believe that everything is equally good, right, and true. There is right and wrong, true and false, good and bad. But isn't this where we're all at? I mean, to some level, I think all of us have some kind of intellectual intolerance at some point. And I know it's been a few months since this happened, but we all remember when we saw that horrific video of the death of George Floyd. And didn't most of us believe that what the police officer did was horribly wrong? Of course we did. If so, then you don't believe in intellectual tolerance, because you're not saying, well, what's right for him is right for him. When we talk about the importance of tolerance, we mean legal or social tolerance, not intellectual tolerance. And this is true for lifestyle issues as well. If you believed in intellectual tolerance, this would mean that any and every lifestyle choice must be affirmed as equally good and safe and fulfilling as any other. But do you really believe this? Once again, do you really believe it's good to intentionally treat people unjustly because of the color of their skin? I would hope all of us would reject this lifestyle. Christianity walks a fine but important line, just like most of us do on any number of lifestyle issues. It's a fine line between grace and truth, but there are lines. Don't reject it just because they're lines, or even because you don't like the lines. Reject it because you determine that Jesus isn't who he said he was. That if there is a God, it's not the God of the Bible. Or you've determined that Jesus is who he said he was, and that there is a God, and it's the God of the Scriptures. In other words, you've decided that he is who he said he was. Start off finding the truth instead of just finding whatever, affirms what it is that you affirm. Don't you want to start with the truth before you start getting into lines that what you don't like and what you do like? Wouldn't it be smarter to find out if there was a line maker? Then you can determine what that means for your life. Do you know what this means? This isn't about judgmentalism, hypocrisy, or even about intolerance. Those aren't the real issues here. Jesus is. He is who he said he was, or he wasn't. And I hope this is where your focus will be. We're actually going to be starting a great course called Rooted, just a chance for you to walk through some of your understanding of what it means to be a Christ follower. And I want to invite you to join that, and you can sign up for that through the app. And maybe you're ready to take that next step and stop basing what it is you believe about Jesus based upon cathedrals and stained glass and people who've misrepresented him. But you're ready to truly follow him. And we have baptisms coming up soon. We'd love to invite you to join us in.